With a couple of decades of experience already under my belt and the benefit of hindsight, I wish I could go back and tap the 20-something-year-old version of myself and depart some nuggets of wisdom. Now, obviously, I can't do that, but if you're in your 20s, make sure you pay close attention because I'm going to depart 25 pieces of wisdom that I've acquired over the course of my career. The first piece of advice would be if you don't advocate or fight for your career path or your income, nobody's going to do it for you. You can't rely on somebody else to pull you along. Most people think that there is somebody going to tap you on the shoulder when it's time to consider a promotion and move into a management career path, or when the person is underpaid, lowballed, skip by for a raise or a bonus. They think it'll happen next time. The fact is, and I've learned this the hard way, is that it's likely never going to come. If you want that promotion or the big salary increases, it's up to you to make it happen yourself by acting as your own advocate. The next thing I've learned is if you stay in a job or a company for too long, the open market is likely to pass you by, meaning that people who are newly graduated are going to be coming into the workforce with significantly less experience than you and often earning the same or potentially more. Wage stagnation often happens over a long period of time where you're only earning small incremental cost of living merit increases, whereas the open market is increasing at a greater percentage. Furthermore, you also find that there's a point of diminishing returns, where an employer will only be willing to pay for a certain number of years of experience and skill. And those of you who have moved beyond that level of skill but haven't moved up in level will often find yourself stuck in wage stagnation. So therefore, it's crucially important not to get bogged down in the same job type for too terribly long. Otherwise, you're likely to fall behind the rest of your peer group. The next piece of advice is that the only people who are going to remember how late you stayed, what overtime you put in, or how many hours you worked is your family. Your boss isn't going to notice it. So therefore, putting in face time with the hopes of getting promoted, or worse, out of fear of keeping your job, you're likely going to be spinning your wheels. And unfortunately, the biggest losers here are your family and the people who care about you. The next piece of advice I'd like to share with 20-something-year-olds in their career is that no matter how special you think you are replaceable. And listen, I know there's people out there thinking, no way, I'm too valuable, and if I left, the place would crumble without me. And what I'll say to that is that's your ego speaking. And realistically, as much as we want to believe that we're integral to the business, a company will figure out how to live without you. And I will say this as a litmus test. Look back in your career, that job that you quit 5 years ago where you thought the same thing, they're probably still operating just fine without you. Our egos tend to get in the way, and what it results is in career apathy, where we start to take things for granted. And when you take things for granted, that's usually when disaster strikes. The next thing I've learned over the course of time, and in particular in my recruiting career, is that those who are best qualified don't always get the job. And in fact, it's often somebody who's lesser qualified on paper. 99% of the time, the person who's landing the job is the person who's best equipped at marketing themselves. And I know that people don't feel that they should have to market themselves in their career, that their credentials should just speak for them. But the reality is that we are career marketers first and foremost, and then whatever job type we do is secondary. Change your mindset here. Learn how to market yourself. It will pay immense dividends in your 30s, 40s, and beyond. The next reality that I learned very bluntly in my 40s that I didn't realize in my 20s is you are a line on a spreadsheet. And no matter how special you think you are, how replaceable you think you are, a company will look at you and what value you bring at that present moment and for their future plans. And if you no longer fulfill an ongoing need for them, even if you were a star performer in the past, you are likely to end up on a layoff list. No job is safe, and it is a what have you done for me lately mentality. And the minute that they perceive you to no longer add value, they will consider you to be a liability and they will look for ways to exit you from the business. And that brings me to my next point of wisdom. The best way to protect yourself from future income disruption is by not relying on a single source of income like a salary. Because when you can pay your bills in more than one way, you will no longer have to be reactive to the job market, taking the first opportunity that comes your way and likely accepting jobs that are going to hurt your resume going forward. This is crucially important. And for those who might be struggling with ideas, I recommend that you work harder, not smarter. And that's where I'd like to introduce today's sponsor, Build Your Store. They offer a really innovative AI-driven solution where you can get started building out your own e-commerce store. So basically, you set up a Shopify storefront and allow the system to create everything for you, including helping you determine what products to sell. And while they're busy doing all the heavy lifting of getting your Shopify storefront up and running, you can then focus on getting people to actually visit your site and hopefully make some sales. The best part is they make it as easy as possible to get started. You don't have to have a technical background. You don't have to know how to code websites. And there is a low-cost option to try it out and see if it's right for you. So if you're interested in de-risking your career and getting started with multiple streams of income, check out Build Your Store. I will leave a link in the video description below. The next piece of advice I'd like to depart on my 20-something-year-old self is that business isn't always fair. And in fact, playing by the rules doesn't often get you promoted. And you'll probably notice this as you look around your workplace. You'll see people who seemingly aren't deserving of the success that they're having. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to kiss up to your boss, but it would be well worth you learning some of the dynamics of office politics and leverage them to your advantage. Next thing is something I know my 20-something-year-old self wouldn't want to hear, but being overly reserved is actually detrimental to your career. If you're somebody that struggles to insert yourself into the conversation or doesn't like to have any attention brought on you, maybe is that wallflower who never speaks up in meetings, it's something that you should probably get over. Learning how and when to assert yourself in your career will pay massive dividends. And it goes without saying, this next one is that a company will walk all over you if you let them. And this is usually a symptom of somebody who doesn't have authority and control over their career. Companies love to push you in certain directions. They like to get as much productivity out of you as they can and wait for you to push back and say no. Now, of course, there's a right way and a wrong way to push back on an employer. And I'd also caution that employers love to pull people on tangents in their career that are inadvertent and not well planned. They may say, hey, there's this thing that we would love you to do, and it's going to be great for you. But in reality, it's usually just great for the company and could ruin your career opportunity or momentum. The next piece of advice is that facts don't care about your feelings. Refusing to adapt, thinking you know it all, being stubborn, or complaining accomplishes nothing. And listen, in spite of everything that you're being told and intuitively what you know you probably need to do, but you refuse to do because you're being stubborn about it, you can't look around at other people who are doing those things, moving up in the organizations, while you're sitting back and being passed by for promotion. And here's another truth. The decisions, and maybe even more importantly, the mistakes that you make in your 20s will not often be felt until much later in your career, deeper in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. And unfortunately, oftentimes you won't know that you're making a critical career mistake until it's too late. Which brings me to my next point is fixing a career mistake is infinitely easier in your 20s than it is in your 30s, 40s, and beyond. The longer you go with a career mistake, the more amplified it becomes over time and the more difficult it becomes to correct. Not impossible, but much more difficult. And taking that a step further is if you're somebody that is thinking that your resume is the problem, it probably is. But the best crafted resume won't fix a career mistake or mistakes that you've made earlier in your career. So in other words, you're only as good as what you can put on the paper in front of you, and no amount of AI tricks or fancy templates are going to be able to solve career faux pas or blunders that you may have made that are too hard to overcome. Which leads me directly to my next point is that a good resume does not guarantee that you're going to get the interview, but a bad resume will guarantee that you won't. And to my earlier point, refusing to adapt your strategy when it comes to resumes and interviewing is only going to hurt you. And my next piece of advice is resume writing, interview skills, and learning how to build a network are the three most impactful skills on the bottom line of what your earning potential will be. If you fail to learn these skills, in other words, how to market yourself effectively, you will likely be leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table over the course of a career. And no amount of hiring somebody else, those resume writers, or those latest AI hacks are going to help solve this problem for you. So again, these are critical career skills that everybody would benefit from, and it's particularly amplified in your 20s. This next piece of advice is likely to get me some nasty comments saying how wrong I am, but it's that cynicism or being overly cynical about your career and about the state of the job market only hurts you. So if you're somebody that truly cares about getting ahead in your career and not somebody that hops from job to job to job, you might want to minimize the time you spend on those anti-work forums. And yes, we all like to beat up at employers. Of course, they give us a lot of ammunition. I'm no different. I spent some time talking about it on this channel, but it's really important to be mindful about how much time you spend in the negative space because it's only going to impact you at the end of the day. The next piece of advice is to be very mindful of companies who offer unlimited time off policies. The reason being is that it's not for the benefit of the employee. It's actually for the benefit of the employer. They no longer have the burden of tracking the time off that you're taking, although an astute boss will still pay attention to how many days you're taking off. But more importantly, when you go to quit your job or you're laid off, they don't have to pay out this huge bank of time off. The next piece of advice I'd share with my 20-something-year-old self is that when a company says that they're not considering layoffs, they are absolutely considering layoffs in the future. So make sure you take the necessary steps to protect yourself and be proactive. And here's a power tip. When you're in your current career, look for opportunities to demonstrate the things that you're likely to be asked about in a future interview. So if you're struggling with demonstrating a specific competency, look for ways to demonstrate the competency today so that you have a great answer going forward. And that leads us to being lazy in your 20s. Makes it infinitely more difficult and harder to keep your head above water in your 40s, 50s, and beyond. Because what happens is that all of those mistakes that you made have a cascading or cumulative effect. And by the time you hit your 40s and 50s, you will realize that you have to work twice as hard in order to try to prepare for retirement. So it's better to work harder in your 20s to set yourself up for an easier path to retirement, your 40s, 50s. The final tip is that the only solution that I have found to reclaim control in your career is to start to act like the CEO, treat your career like a business of one, and start making decisions that are data-driven and purposeful. In other words, I imagine my career to be a boardroom and I sit at the head of the table and I'm making the decisions that are in my best interest first and foremost. And it is perfectly okay to be selfish in your career because if you're not looking out for yourself, nobody else will. Anyway, that's some of the pieces of advice that I would share with my 20-something-year-old self now that I have the benefit of hindsight. And if you're ready to reclaim control in your career, that's exactly what I specialize in teaching. I've got a website called alifeafterlayoff.com, which is loaded with tips and tricks, all from a recruiting insider's perspective. And I teach my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses, the first one being career strategy. And this is going to teach you how to be the CEO of your career. And it's called the Ultimate Career Blueprint, which walks you through how to start a career and end a career with the highest degree of conviction and authority. And we walk through great detail of how to map out your career, how to get promoted, how to move into those leadership ranks, and how to unstick your career so that when you reach the finish line, you can do so with the most conviction and authority. And of course, let's not forget about networking, which is a massive component to our successful career. And I created a course called Unlocking LinkedIn, which not only teaches you how to use LinkedIn in your job search, but it focuses on how to establish networks that actually produce results. So if you're struggling with your networking game, I highly encourage you to check out Unlocking LinkedIn because it goes into great detail on how to actually network effectively. And of course, if you need help with learning how to write a resume like a recruiter would, then check out Resume Rocket Fuel. And if you need more help with your interviewing skills and job search, check out the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp. Anyway, there's a lot of information here. Hopefully you found this to be of value. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.